These were the 5 worst years in WWE history. In this video, I'm going to rank them from number 5 to number 1. Now, you may not agree with the order that I put these in. You'll definitely agree with number 1. And some of these, well, it's going to catch you off guard, and you're not going to be thinking about it. Or you may have forgotten about some of these years. Heck, when I was doing my research for it, I did as well. But when I was going through the facts, I was going through the stats, I could not believe a guy who is 30 had to survive and get through these years in WWE. Some of them. Some of them I wasn't even around yet, but we will get into it. With that being said, here are the 5 worst years in WWE history. Number 5, we're going to go with 2007. In 2007, WWE was simply overshadowed by the unfortunate events that, well, it's the Chris Benoit tragedy. But aside from that, and that was a horrific thing, the things that were also shocking was the product at the time. Yes, there were very good pay-per-views like WrestleMania 23 and Backlash 2007, two back-to-back events. However, there were also some just horrific booking decisions, bad booking decisions, and bad storylines that kept people just lackluster and god-awful feelings coming out of it. Now, John Cena literally going through every hill that challenged him, and the fans eventually got bored with the same thing over and over again. Well, it led to the Great Khali, who became one of the worst world champions in history. We also had the Vince McMahon illegitimate son angle, which turned out to be Hornswoggle, and several wrestlers, your Randy Ortons, your Edges, well, they got hurt as well. It was just a bad time, especially during Monday Night Raw. SmackDown had no depth whatsoever. We were still using Finlay and Mark Henry as main event type talents. It was just bad. It was just bad from the get-go. You did have some bright spots in there every once in a while, but at the end of the day, this was just not a very good time for WWE. They were still in that weird transitional period where they still had some top-tier names from the Attitude Era. Your Undertakers, Shawn Michaels, Triple H's. You kind of had that Ruthless Aggression era type talent as well, whether it would be, Randy Orton, Edge, John Cena, Batista type characters, but it was very few and far between in terms of your top tier talent and your upper mid card talent. It just felt like there was this giant gap in between. At number 4, 2015. Here is why. Because the main event picture absolutely sucked in 2015. Sure, there were bright spots. Seth Rollins had cashed in Money in the Bank at WrestleMania 31 and screwed over Roman Reigns and Brock Lesnar. You also had John Cena's United States title reign, aside from him beating Miro, a.k.a. Rusev, at WrestleMania. Well, all those were not enough to save the year. Because Roman Reigns' overpush by WWE management and Vince McMahon, that was god-awful. You also had the women's division that was just abysmal. They didn't know what to do with it. You had the terrible use of monsters like Ryback and the Big Show in main event scenes. You also had mediocre storylines and terrible pay-per-view events. Go back and look at Survivor Series and Fastlane, the Royal Rumble. You know it's bad with Roman Reigns wins the Royal Rumble and they have The Rock come out there, yet they are booing The Rock. All of those things in which I just mentioned made for 2015 to be a lackluster year. This was also at a time where we were dealing with 3-hour Raws, which, hey, we've been dealing with for a while, but you didn't have the Shield, you didn't have the Wyatt family, you didn't have Daniel Bryan, all of the key core things that got us through 2014. We didn't have those because they split up the Shield, and the Wyatt family was not the same. At the end of the day, you have to look at where WWE was at. Seth Rollins had recently done an interview, and he talked about how CM Punk left WWE at a time in which they did not have the type of roster that they do now. They did not have the type of storylines in which they do not have now, and they had to deal with just bad overall products in which we don't have to deal with now. Go back and watch some of those Raws, right? Really, really bad. You had Authority Kane, right, out there in slacks and stuff. It was bad. Go back. Check it out. You'll see what I mean. Probably the worst year in all of wrestling history. 1993, I kind of lump it in there with 95 as well. 95 was bad, but 93 was a really tough year for WWE. The whole roster was thin. There weren't that many great matches because there wasn't that much great in-ring talent, and most of the feuds were forgettable. Now, keep in mind that WWE, they had gone through the steroid trial, and a lot of top-tier names were gone at this point, right? Hogan, he left during this year. A ton of people left during this year, and they were going through the transitional period and trying to get to the new generation era. This led to pay-per-views just being mediocre and lackluster. The only highlight was King of the Ring. That year, Yokozuna beat Bret Hart to win the WWE Championship at WrestleMania 9, but then Hulk Hogan showed up and took the title away from Yokozuna. He stole the spotlight from a crowning moment for Bret Hart in which he got screwed out of. It also saw Lex Luger beat Yokozuna by countout and celebrated like an idiot after not winning the championship after going on the Lex Express because Vince McMahon just did not feel comfortable with making him the world champion after all of that time and all of the promotional expenses. You also had Vinnie Mac going through legal problems. The only highlight, in my opinion, outside of King of the Ring, which was really, really good, probably the best King of the Ring, was the fact that Monday Night Raw launched. It helped change the course of the company by having a mostly live weekly television show that was a little bit different. Gave a little bit of an edge. I slightly put 93 worse than 95. People knock on it because of Kevin Nash, but 93 was a really, really bad year. Number 2, 2011. Why was 2011 so bad? Well, I can tell you. They fumbled a lot of major storylines. If you go back, it was one of, if not the most uninspiring years in WWE history. Shows, Monday Night Raw, SmackDown, even pay-per-view events. They became just boring and predictable. It's like you were watching the same Monday Night Raw over and over and over. You would have to go and check the date of your DVR or your guide to see if you were watching the same show from the week prior or 2 weeks after that. Wrestlers, they wanted fans to get more, and you couldn't. CM Punk, obviously very vocal about that. That helped change the course of history. That helped change his character drastically. Obviously, everybody knows the story. Did the pipe bomb, did the Money in the Bank 2011 match with John Cena, won the WWE Championship, walked out. They did the Summer of Punk. Did not last long because they needed a main event for SummerSlam. They rushed it back. He feuded with Kevin Nash at one point. Triple H at one point. Just bad. 2011, in addition to CM Punk, you did have standouts like Randy Orton versus Christian Cage. That was a great, great feud. You also had Mark Henry probably having his best year with the Hall of Pain, and then obviously the classic matches between Punk and John Cena. But it also was at a time where there wasn't a lot of top-tier talent, and there wasn't a lot of interesting talent, and it caused boringness, if that's even a term, at the main event scene. It was just uninspiring, and the mid-card sucked as well. So despite that having some positives, I think that year was overshadowed by all the negatives, because you can only pick out a few bright spots of 2011, and you can shed a lot of light, a lot of dark light on 2011 with bad. Number 1, the worst year in WWE history, it was 2020. It was because of the pandemic. Now, look, the pandemic was a rough time for everyone, from me and you to wrestling promotions, etc. But WWE, they had to nix a lot of WrestleMania plans. Heck, they had to tape WrestleMania. They had to air most of that year out of the Performance Center. That was bad. You had a horrific decision-making by the company because they were releasing talent and employees despite being the most profitable that they've ever been at the time because they were trying to keep the bottom line. The main event scene was nothing. There was no good creative because they didn't know what they were doing, and they were just trying to get through week to week. You also had the rise of Retribution, or horrific faction. They were showcasing Jeff Hardy's deep demons with alcoholism and drug addiction. It was just bad overall. You couldn't get any worse than the pandemic, and WWE certainly